So what we have here is a desk, an executive's desk. It's the desk of the CEO, the president, chief executive officer, his desk and his chair, and the place where somebody comes to sit. And we understand this. This is where the decisions are made. This is where the shots are called from. This is where people are told what to do. We understand this. It's an executive desk. But sometimes we begin to think of God in this way, that God has a desk, and he has his books and his picture, and he has his chair, God's chair, and a place where people come to visit with God. And we begin to think about God. Well, he's in charge of the universe, and he makes decisions, and he tells people what to do. But sometimes when we think of God this way, we begin to think that the God who sits in this chair really couldn't be too concerned about me. I mean, he's got the whole universe on his mind. How could he be aware of what's going on in my life? And especially when we feel broken, we think that way. So when we've failed a test, or got defriended on Facebook, or we have a relationship that falls apart, or there's a family problem back home, and we begin to think, well, God, I mean, he's at his desk. He's controlling the universe. He really couldn't be thinking about what I'm facing. Well, we're not the first ones to think that. There's a group of people that Isaiah talks about in his book in chapters 40 through 55. And these people have been beaten and broken. They're homeless, and they've just been done in. And their view is that God's at his desk, but he doesn't really have much time for them. Really is not focused on them. And so Isaiah writes, and he says a couple of things to them. The first thing he says is in verse 13 of chapter 49. He's talking to these people, and he says, "Sing for joy, O heavens, and exalt, O earth. Break forth, O mountains, into singing, for the Lord has comforted his people. And he will have compassion on his afflicted." So Isaiah tells these people that are beaten up and broken, he says, God's paying attention to you. You may think he doesn't have you in mind, but he's actually showing compassion to you. You may not be aware of the comfort, or you may think he has no comfort, but even in your lowest moment, he's showing comfort. Well, it doesn't fly. It doesn't fly. And so the people, they're called Zion here, here's their response to that. Verse 14. "The Lord has forsaken me. My Lord has forgotten me." So these people, beaten down, homeless, wrecked lives, they think the God that sits in this chair, he doesn't have any time for them at all. And then God speaks. And he has two illustrations that aim to show that the one who sits in this chair does care. Here's the first one. This is verse 15. "Can a woman forget her sucking child, that she should have no compassion of the son of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will not forget you." So he brings up the issue of a nursing mother. And we can imagine a woman has a child, and she's holding the child, feeding the child. And God says, well, could this woman forget her child? We say, well, that'd be incredible. That couldn't happen. God says, well, even if you can find someone like that, I won't forget you. I lived in Memphis for 22 years, and there's a neighborhood near St. Jude Children's Hospital, and it's an economically deprived neighborhood. One night when we lived there, about 3 o'clock in the morning, a man was driving his car down the street, and suddenly, right in the middle of the street, he stopped, got out of the car, opened the back door, and there was a pile of stuff on the back seat, and he just took that pile of stuff and he just scraped it right out onto the street. Closed the door, got back in the car, and drove on. Well, about an hour later, a police car came down that street, saw the pile of junk in the middle of the street. Not that unusual, unfortunately, for that neighborhood. And so they were just going to drive by this pile of stuff on the street when suddenly something very unusual happened. The pile moved. They stopped. The police got out, dug through the pile, found a 3-month-old baby girl. They investigated, found that the mother had the baby in the back seat, drove home. She was high on drugs, went into the house, passed out. Her husband, high on alcohol, borrowed her car without asking her, driving down the road, heard the baby cry, was irritated, didn't realize, and just pushed his own child on the street. Even if you can find a father or mother like that, God says, I won't desert you. And then the second illustration God gives is in verse 16. Behold, I have you graven on the palms of my hands, and your walls are continually before me. God says, I've got your name tattooed on my hand. I've got it written right there. My son Nathan has this nasty habit of taking his ink pen and making notes on his hand. I don't like it, but he does that. But God does it. And he writes our names on his hand. Let me just change the image slightly. Suppose we were to go to heaven and we walk into God's office and, well, here's God's desk. There's his desk right there, big executive desk, and here's God's chair. And I mean, look at what God's reading, and God's gone. He's out fixing some broken problem somewhere, and so he's not there. And then we see the photograph on God's desk. We pick it up. And there's the picture that God has on his desk. And the picture is your picture. God has you in the photograph on his desk. And then he goes on, one last line. He says, your builders outstrip your destroyers. Always going to be people around breaking us down and trying to defeat us. But the builders will outstrip the defeaters. And so this little story reflects the Christian worldview which we hold at Ohio Valley University. That worldview, very simply, is that God created a very good world, and then we broke it. And then God sent Jesus to fix that broken world. And once he fixes us, he invites us to join him in fixing the rest of the world. Amen. One more thing, the chair. The chair at God's desk. The chair's for you. Because if God has fixed your brokenness, he invites you into his office to help him fix the brokenness of others. Just remember, God has a portrait on his desk, and it's your picture. Have a great day.